grant process for projects related to media literacy. Our state passed some legislation a couple of years ago focused on digital citizenship and media literacy. And so there was a call for proposals, particularly with librarians, but it didn't have to be librarians, to propose ideas to develop open educational resource content to promote media literacy. And the reason I knew about this was because of my connection with some of the state work around this. And so that's how I found out about the project, even though I'm not currently working in a school district. But I reached out to another fellow teacher who was a teacher of the year as well, part of a network that I was with. And I said, hey, do you want to do this project with me? And so we started talking. So she brought her teacher colleague into it. And then we were talking about it. I said, well, should we do it within the Vancouver School District or should we do it someplace else? She said, oh, no, we have a connection with the Educational Service District. So we brought them in because of her connection. And as a result, the idea became stronger and we got funded for it and we're going to be working together, and that will by itself expand my professional learning network. And so what you're doing, this network that you've built is going to serve you so well as a professional. And it's also going to strengthen all of the people that you work with. So keep it up. It's important work. It takes time, it takes energy, but your professional friends are the best friends you can possibly have, because most of the time that we're spending during the day, we're working on our professional work. So keep it up. It's good stuff. So with that, let me see if I can get my screen shared appropriately here. I'm going to share screen. There we go. So hopefully I can get this going. Just a moment here. Hold on a second. I'm going to actually stop sharing. I selected the wrong screen. Just a moment. That should be it. All right. Sorry here. There. Okay, do we see a slide that says Future Ready Librarians Restarting Conversations? Are we in business?
Yes.
Sweet. Okay, great. All right. So there we go. Let me just kind of introduce myself just a little bit. My name is Mark Ray. I hail from Portland, Oregon, actually in Vancouver, Washington, which is a suburb of Portland, Oregon. So I'm a West Coast guy. And I've lived here pretty much all my life. I've had an opportunity to travel the world and the nation and get away from the Pacific Northwest, but this is definitely my home. I was a teacher librarian for 20 years. I began as an elementary librarian, and then I became a middle school librarian. Then I moved over to the International School of Brussels in Belgium and was the head of libraries and elementary librarian there for a couple of years. Then I came back and I was a high school librarian for 13 years. So all total, there was about 20 years. I've been a librarian at all levels and have enjoyed all levels. I can't say that I have a favorite, but they've all been wonderful challenges. And then in that last year, my wonderful principal suggested and nominated me to be a Washington State Teacher of the Year. And at first I said, that's a really, really crazy idea. And then I said, well, why not? Why can't a librarian be a Teacher of the Year? And so I said, okay, let's go ahead and go for this. And lo and behold, I was selected 2012 Washington State Teacher of the Year, the first time that a librarian was selected Teacher of the Year. And that kind of changed my life. It certainly created some new opportunities for networks and opportunities. I started writing for Teacher Librarian Magazine and School Library Journal. Had an opportunity to start working on some national projects. And it also, in my own district, my boss at the time asked me to become an administrator. And so after saying no 5 times, I finally said yes. And then for the next 7 years, I was a school district administrator. I began as a manager of instructional technology, and at one point was chief digital officer, overseeing all the technology operations for a district of about 23,000 students. So I've had the corner office, and I never really signed up for it. So when I say accidental administrator, that's absolutely intentional. I never aspired to be an administrator, but I was an administrator. And so I can speak a little bit to kind of the challenges and the opportunities of working with administrators. And that's what we're going to talk about today. As you know, I did a TED Talk a few years back, and that was just a wonderful challenge. I would strongly encourage you, if you ever have an opportunity to do a TED Talk, even in a small venue, it's a wonderful challenge. If you have a good idea or a big idea that you want to share with the public, it's really a great opportunity and a wonderful professional challenge. I have no regrets. In fact, Julie, one of the colleagues that was with us at that same lunch, I encouraged, he's the guy that built his own plane and then flew it across the United States. Anyway, I suggested him to do a TED Talk, and he actually reached out to me just recently about thinking about maybe doing a TED Talk here in the future. So that was kind of cool.
Oh, that is so awesome. I
Yeah,
love that.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I said, I remember that conversation, we were talking about it, and he said, you really should do a TED Talk on this. This is a great TED Talk. And so hopefully he'll find a way to do that. Then also for the last 4 years, I've been associated with Future Ready Librarians. Wonderful opportunity. I was working with actually an initiative called Project Connect that Follett started about 5 years ago. And it was really about kind of identifying what was the role of librarians in 21st century schools. And that morphed into this project with Future Ready, and I'll talk a little bit more about that here in just a second. So I've been working with that really for the last 4 years, and that's kind of the big chunk of my work right now. And I'm currently on leave with my district. For the last year, I've been working from home, not associated with the district in any formal way. And I consider myself a free-range educator. And so that gives me the opportunity to do things like this and do some consulting work and do some writing. And I'm really excited about that. All right, so I think everybody has access to the resources. If you go to bit.ly/FRL C Convo, I think it's in the chat box. I think everybody's into it. What I've done is I basically created an organizer for everything that we're going to cover today. If you look at the organizer, there's some things that are highlighted in yellow. Those are the things that you're going to need to pay attention to, particularly because we're going to be using those tools. There's also a lot of resources. I tried to curate. There's a lot of links on there, and there's a lot of resources. But we're going to cover quite a bit of stuff today. So I try to curate down to what I think would be the best and the brightest. The first link is the link to Future Ready Librarians, and that's really a great source of information. You'll be able to get to the tools. There's going to be a public-facing side to the tools. They'll be available there. So those are basically the resources. So I didn't share the slide stack just because I thought that would be a little bit confusing. So I'll kind of lead you through the process, but that outline will effectively get you through everything. All right. One of the things that I'm learning with working online is that you have to scaffold and build capacity on the part of other educators to be able to work in an online environment. So this is actually a slide I added really literally at the last minute this morning. To kind of, if we have learning goals, it's really important to have objective and learning goals when we do presentations or when we do any instruction. I think one of the things that's also useful is to scaffold and let people know what tools are going to be used during the workshop or the class that's going on. So I've put those down there just so that you're aware of those. I know that this cohort of librarians are superstars. They're power users. They're technical. You guys are the best and the brightest of the states that you represent. And I just wanted to model this, is that as you're working with other colleagues, I think it's really important to make sure your objectives are really, really clear, and that you try to use only the technology that's necessary to do the job that you're trying to do. Because one of the things that I've heard consistently from both district leaders and educators is that there's they're overwhelmed by the tool set. And so trying to keep it simple and constrained is best practice these days. And then as we get more facility, we can always add more, but try not to be gratuitous and you use the technology tools because it may be fun for you, but for others, it may be a real barrier. So I've tried to keep it relatively simple, not to dumb it down, but to try to make it effective. All right, so I'm gonna give you a quick little overview of kind of Future Ready Librarians. This is not going to be a spiel about Future Ready Librarians. And most of what we're going to be talking about today actually is kind of future ready agnostic. Really, the process and the conversations that we're going to have today are really about localizing your practice and trying to find solutions that are specific to your school or district. But I do want to talk a little bit about Future Ready and Future Ready Librarian, just so you have a little bit of a context. You can read the slides for yourself. Essentially, Future Ready Librarians began as an initiative with superintendents. So they pulled together something like 100 superintendents to the White House back in 2014, and it was part of a variety of initiatives that the Department of Education had at that point. And the idea is to try to identify what are some of the systemic areas that good districts have in common, and trying to kind of identify and pull those out so that other districts could emulate that and become more powerful. It was intentionally focused on digital learning and digital tools, but it became something very quickly much more than that. So that there's a strong focus on budget, on infrastructure, on curriculum instruction and assessment. So it's not just about digital tools, it's about a lot of other tools as well. So as I kind of alluded to before, is Future Ready Librarians was the first non-district leader strand. So we had this idea from Project Connect, and some friends at Follett, as well as people at Department of Education, and we talked about it and said, well, why not Future Ready Librarians? And so this happened all around at the same time as my TED Talk. And Future Ready said, yeah, let's do it. And Follett supported it from a funding standpoint. And so we launched it. And it's been really a runaway success. Of all the strands that are connected with Future Ready, and there are Future Ready principals, there's Future Ready coaches, there's Future Ready IT directors. There's just been this really strong embrace within the librarian community around Future Ready Librarians. And so we developed our own framework, and you can see it there on the right hand side. That was the original framework, and what we did is we took the gears that Future Ready had and we made them into wedges, and we haven't really looked back since that time. A lot of the other strands have come along after us to follow that model, but we were the ones that kind of developed that outline. So the other thing too that's been going on for the last 4 years, is that we've been doing these Future Ready Institutes, and they have been face-to-face, moderately large group meetings, which probably are not going to happen this fall. But they've been opportunities to bring together not only librarians, but principals and district leaders from around the United States to talk about these challenges that we face as organizations. So present, this is the new framework. You'll see on the right-hand side, you'll see a little bit of difference there. You see we adjusted the design just a little bit. And so we've developed a framework. The other thing too that changed with version 2.0 is a focus on literacy. One of the things we heard from librarians was that, well, where's literacy, where are books, where's reading? And so we literally put that in the middle of the framework, and that's been a nice addition. We've also, I've worked with ISTE, and we actually have a full online ISTE course that goes through the Future Ready Librarians framework. Nebraska actually, as a state, has adopted that course, and all of the librarians throughout the state are taking that course to kind of guide their professional learning and professional development, which is really cool. Really a nice evolution of that product. We also launched a micro-credential focused on empowering students as creators. We launched it just as the coronavirus hit, and so we're going to relaunch it again in the fall, because a lot of the librarians were not in school to be able to do the work, and so we're going to relaunch that in the fall. But again, all of this information is available on the Future Ready Librarians website. All right, so the future, and these are the things that are kind of cool. I'm really excited to be working with you today. Once I stop talking, you'll have a chance to get to work and roll up your sleeves and do some self-assessment, some cool things with your planning for next year. So we've developed two new tools, or I've developed two new tools that are literally launching as we speak. The self-assessment tool, up until the very last minute last night, I was waiting for a link. And so you are the very first people to have access to this new version of this tool that we've developed. So there's two things. One is we've developed a very simple survey to help librarians assess their skill set and their actions and their work against the Future Ready framework. So it takes about 5 minutes, 10 minutes, maybe, if it depends on how fast you read. And it gives you essentially an assessment of where you are, some ratings in terms of where you are in terms of your skills. It's not intended as an evaluation tool. It's intended as a tool to kind of guide your professional learning and your professional planning for the coming year. We've also developed, largely because of my some conversations with Britton Follett, one of the things we discovered a couple of years ago is that librarians really struggle with having conversations with building and district leaders to try to identify how they can work together in more powerful ways. So we developed a protocol, which again, literally just launched in the last several days. So you're among the first to actually see it. And I'm going to walk you through that process so you have a sense of what that is. We're not going to do We're going to go through all the steps, but we're not going to have you do all the work. You're going to have to do that. If you find this valuable and you want to use this in your own practice, there's some things that you'll have to do when you have conversations with your principals at a later time. But I'll kind of prime the pump with you today and give you an opportunity to take a look at that. All right. So, there's a lot of great resources and frameworks and tools that are out there. AASL, in my conversation with Julie, and it was just, there's so many things out there. In fact, right now there are almost too much information, too many resources coming at teachers and librarians and district leaders. Everyone has a solution. AASL historically has been a great resource, a very comprehensive set of standards and guidelines for the practice. Thumbs up. That's still a useful tool. I'm a big fan of the ISTE student standards and the educator standards. Really clean, concise, outstanding resource for guiding practice. Also a really good tool. So Future Ready Librarians kind of is another piece of the puzzle. I think that what having done this now for the last 4 years, Future Ready Librarians is really powerful because it puts librarians on the same page as district leaders and IT directors and instructional coaches and principals. And we'll actually do a little activity where we can kind of see how that works. I think that it's useful because in these times of challenge in the pandemic, we need to keep things simple, and we need to try to keep ourselves on the same page and sitting at the same table. And I think that Future Ready Librarians in this process gives us a means by which we can do that. The other thing I think that's really important is that Future Ready Librarians and Future Ready itself is really focused on systemic change. So it never was written specifically for librarians or for classroom teachers. It was really about how do we change whole systems. And so because of that focus, it allows us to insert ourselves into conversations that are different from those that we traditionally have as librarians. And I think that's a really critical piece. And I'm going to pause. I've been talking nonstop. Are there any questions? Feel free to just use audio if you want to. Are there any questions or comments so far? And I can pull up chat too if there are. Anything? Are we still good? I'm going to catch my breath. Wait time. All right, good.
Pretty quiet.
That's all right. We will actually get our sleeves going here, our sleeves up and fingers going here in just a second. So I've come to describe what we're in right now as the new abnormal. I don't want to call it the new normal because there's really nothing normal about it. When you think about the pandemic and the long overdue discussions about race and equity that have emerged concurrent with all the things that are going on with the pandemic, these are not normal times. And that maybe is a good thing. That it'll force us to think about things in different ways, not only the issues in our greater community and society, but also in education. I'm sure that you're feeling this firsthand. So this is I'm preaching to the converted. Is that in the present, what we're living in right now, as far as education is concerned, is there is a profound disruption. School has operated much the same as it has for the last 100 years. There have been really no significant shocks to the system. And this is one of the first authentic shocks to schools and to educational systems that's occurred truly in the last century. When we think about the impact of war, the world wars, they touched schools, but they didn't really change schools. And what happened over the last 3 or 4 months has profoundly changed schools, and in many ways probably will change it forever. Another real challenge is the loss of learning. There's a link, I believe, on my organizer, New York Times or Atlantic, one of the journals, documented the significant loss of learning that's going to occur as a result of just what's happened already. And so we've already set our students back. And so there's going to be a challenge for educators to not only catch up, but also to mitigate some of those losses that have occurred. As we think about the fall, I think there's going to be sustained uncertainty. I think whatever we do in the fall will probably be different when we get to spring. There's going to be a lot of fits and starts, false successes. Who knows what will happen as a result of the social changes and the epidemiological challenges that we're facing. So educators are really facing unprecedented uncertainty. And that is something we need to keep in mind as we're planning our own professional work in working with those educators. We need to be empathetic and thinking about that in some new ways. One of the things I think that's kind of interesting about this challenge in schools is, as a librarian, and I think all of us would probably nod in consensus, is that almost every day we wake up thinking, are we going to have a job tomorrow? Much of my writing has been around the area of library advocacy. And so I've always faced an existential challenge to my professional existence. For many other educators, this is the first time that they fear for their own future as an educator. Arts teachers, music teachers, choir teachers suddenly face the possibility that they won't be able to teach what they've been teaching for a long time. Physical education teachers, large groups, that may be a challenge. I had a conversation with a colleague that said that associate principals are suddenly don't have discipline to do anymore. And so, why would we even need to have associate principals anymore if we don't need to have students being disciplined because they aren't in school? We don't know exactly what the future is going to hold, but it's almost certain that there's a lot of other educators that are going to face a real uncertainty about what their role is and whether they even have a role in the schools of the future. As I shared before, the fault lines are exposed. I think that the shock that the pandemic has posed to our schools has revealed that these issues of equity have always been there, and now we're just seeing them for the first time. Issues of access to digital content and digital tools. We've been talking about that for decades, and now suddenly it's a mission critical issue. So I think that we're in a period of time in which we're going to have to, I think, really be reflective about our own practice and about the things that we've been doing in schools so that we can make them better things. And I'm optimistic, in spite of the fact that this is going to be the most depressing slide that I'm sharing with you, is that I think that there's really some great opportunities down the road, but it really is going to take some leadership on the part of librarians and school leaders and district leaders to be able to make a change. The last thing I want to say too is, I know that librarians like things to be, most librarians I should say, like things to be kind of predictable and organized. I was never that kind of librarian. I always liked change. I kind of thrived on change. And my guess is probably a lot of you are kind of in that same vein, just judging by the fact that you're part of this cohort. I think the thing you need to also plan for and kind of factor into your thinking for the future is that whatever we do, we're going to have lots of pivots. And that we're not going to find a solution right away. And probably those solutions are going to be very different depending on where you live. And probably, given the fact that you represent 3 states, you're probably going to be, each of your states, each of your districts, each of your systems is probably going to have different solutions going forward. So there's going to be multiple pivots. And as an evidence of that, I'm going to share this, this tweet that I saw just a couple of days ago. So you can read for yourself here this quote. And what's really interesting about this is, and I guess I'm sharing this because I want you to feel okay with the fact that things are not going to be settled for a while and that the rules are going to change potentially every week. This is a tweet from a superintendent friend of mine in New York. We are not the only ones. Librarians and educators and parents are not the only ones that are going to be frustrated and struggling with what will be almost constant dynamic change. And so we need to plan accordingly for it. And it's okay if you get frustrated with it, because here we have, and he's like a nationally recognized superintendent, a wonderful gentleman, amazingly high functioning district, and there his frustration is very evident in terms of the changes and the fact that he can't control the variables that are outside of his situation. All right, so we're going to be talking about how to lead with leaders. And I've had the wonderful opportunity of having a rich history of working with fantastic leaders as principals and as district leaders. I've also had some terrible ones. So I've had the good and the bad. I'm going to challenge you in the coming 90 minutes to really think about how can you lead beyond the library, because what this conversation really is about making the library stronger, but really reaching beyond your comfort zone and your realm of control and operations to do some leadership outside of that. And my sense is that probably you're already doing some of these things, and so that's why I put the title of it is Restarting Conversations. Some of you may have already had those conversations and already have rich relationships with your superintendents and your school leaders. That's great. Really what this is an opportunity to, if you've already had those, to try to think about how can we make them pandemically relevant and kind of build on those relationships. And for those of you that maybe don't have those relationships or want to stretch beyond maybe a building principal to a district leader, it's going to give you an opportunity to kind of think about that as well. I think one of the things too that librarians need to recognize, and this is something I learned in my own practice, is that being in charge of a library is really more about managing. And that when you move into a district or school leadership role, it's really a very different skill set and set of responsibilities. And so what we'll talk about in this next 90 minutes or so is really about how do you do that. And then the last piece is really one of the key pieces of the Future Ready framework, as well as a lot of other frameworks, is this idea is how can you work with other leaders? How can you find common ground? How can you build empathy and rapport with a colleague so that you can provide some leadership beyond your own domain within the library? I'm going to pause for just a second and pull up chat here and see if there's. I'm looking for Q&A. Any? I'm just gonna check for chat here.
So we're just talking. The chat is you're thanking you for the acknowledging the uncertainty, and that is something that we've got definitely going on right now. And Joan says change is messy but so important. And then Karen tags on and says it's uncomfortable but worth it in the end. So thank you for acknowledging the change and the uncertainty.
Yes, absolutely. And if something else comes up, please let me know, and we'll have a chance to pull that up. All right, so let's talk about future planning here. This is an opportunity to really use these tools as a means. This is perfectly timed. The fact that we're in June and you're gonna be thinking about next year, it's gonna give you an opportunity to really kind of prime the pump and get ready for the coming year. So we're gonna be using the self-assessment tool. You'll be the very first people to use this version of the tool. It's just It's not really out even in the public. There's not even a link to it, so you're the first ones to use it. We're also going to be using the Conversation Starter Protocol, and this is a pretty detailed, there's a pretty extensive PDF, and I've intentionally made it detailed to guide people through the process and to make sure that they prepare well. It really lends itself better to a course or a workshop, but we've created a PDF at this point, at least, to give people that resource. So we'll use that, and then you're going to come out with a personal plan for collaborative leadership. So we're really excited about doing that. Okay, so this is what we're going to do together. We're going to walk through the Conversation Starter Protocol. We're going to discuss some details about the different steps, but we're not going to have you do all the work. We're going to have you do a few of the pieces, but a lot of this is something you're going to have to, if you choose to do so, do when you get back to school, or, well, you're not going back to school, but when you get back to thinking about your own plan. And then ideally, this is going to give you an opportunity to start thinking about a personal and learning plan for the coming year. These are the essential questions and conversations that are part of the protocol, and these are the steps that we're going to be going through. It's really intended to be a reflection, research, a planning, and conversation protocol. So really kind of guiding you through all the necessary steps of not only preparing for a conversation with a school or district leader, but also doing the research and due diligence so that you can be ready and prepared to have a really productive conversation with them. So the first step is what's my mindset? And this is really about reflecting on your own, holding a mirror up to your own professional practice and your own habits of mind and your own beliefs, as a means to kind of prepare yourself for that conversation with others. So what we're going to do is, and this is, I'm going to stop talking for a few minutes, give you an opportunity to look at a couple of resources that are available. So I'm going to kind of talk you through the process here. So on the organizer, and I'll pull up the link again for you just in case you don't have it. I've learned that you don't run videos on Zoom. So I'm going to have each of you take a look at a link on the organizer around growth mindset. Some of you may be already familiar with the idea of growth and fixed mindset, but if not, this is going to be a good reminder. It's nice and short. And then what I'd like you to do is search for a growth mindset or fixed mindset, growth mindset. You can do a Carol Dweck search or whatever, an image rather than text. I want you to find an image that you like, that resonates with you. And then what I'd like you to do is, once we've had a chance to do that, I'm gonna give you about 10 minutes to watch that video and kind of do the search. And then what I'm gonna ask Julie to do is break you out into groups and have you think about what are some things that you do that fit on the fixed mindset part of the spectrum, and what are some things that are more growth oriented. Because the fact is that we are not all growth mindset people all the time. I will wake up some mornings and I will be massively fixed because of my mood, because of what's happening around me. It just happens. And so we are all on the spectrum. And so we need to think about what are those things that fit on the different sides, and use that as a tool for us to think about the way we're going to have conversations with others. And then when we're done, we'll have an opportunity to look at conversational positions. So with that, this is where I need you to go. You can go to bit.ly, FRL Convo, which again, hopefully most everybody is already on. What I'd like you to do is take about 10 minutes to view the video and then do a search for a growth mindset or a growth fixed mindset image. And then we'll put you into breakout rooms and have conversations with your colleagues, have you talk about in what ways are you fixie and in what ways are you growthy. I'm going to pause in case there's any questions, but if not, then I'm going to have Julie move people, get ready to move us into some breakout rooms, but we'll take about 10 minutes. I'll check my timer here. Okay, about 10 minutes, and have you watch the video, select an image, and then we'll move you into the breakout rooms. Is that going to work, Julie?
Yep, that sounds perfect. And
Fantastic.
so you're going to watch the video on your own, and we will.
Researcher and Professor Carol Dweck uses the term mindset to describe the way people think about ability and
And
talent.
someone has,
They've been muted.
okay. It is all about me. I'm sharing my thoughts to you. I am not listening to you, partly because we're on a digital platform, and my ideas are most important. There's nothing wrong with first position. First position is when we are running, when we are presenting, when we are doing things that are specific to us. That's perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with first position. We have to be in first position to get our ideas across. And some people never move out of first position. I have a dear librarian colleague here in Vancouver who will go unnamed, who always seems to be in first position. She is a wonderful, thoughtful, professional woman and does great work as a librarian. And she's so first position almost all the time that she is unable to listen to what other people have to say or to engage in a conversation. It's really all about telling her what she's excited about. And she's frequently excited about these really great ideas, but she just never moves out of first position. And in that way, it's a barrier to her ability to interact with other people. Second position is really about this idea of standing in somebody else's shoes, is to pause, to think, to listen, to try to build empathy and understanding of what the other person is saying and doing, both what they're actually physically saying, but also kind of their actions and their personal behaviors, and so it's really about uh, listening and questioning so that you can understand what somebody else is saying. Third position is a little bit abstract, and there's actually a fourth position, but I didn't want to go completely crazy. But third position is really stepping outside of the conversation itself and observing what's going on here. And so all three of these conversational positions are something that need to be considered when you're having a conversation with a district leader in any interpersonal situation. And if we're aware of those things in the same way that our fixed and growth mindset behaviors are in place, if we can be kind of aware of this dynamic, it will help us to be more effective in that conversation. So I tried to do a build on Google Slides, but it kept crashing. So everything is on here at the same time. I was going to try to do some nice, transitions and slides. Anyway, first position essentially is you're in your own body. You're focused on yourself and your own story, and you're sharing that with someone else. You're telling someone else that. Second position is really about the other person's body, really being receptive to what they're saying, what they're doing, how they're moving. It's a focus on them and trying to understand what their story is, what they're trying to say. A really critical piece of second position is questioning, is listening and questioning and trying to understand. Third position is the stepping outside of the conversation and really looking at what is being said and what is the process that's going on. I'm sure all of you have been in situations where you're in a meeting or in a group of people, and you kind of either because of the what's being said or whether you're bored, you kind of step outside of the group and observe, it's really interesting what this person is saying over here. And it's like, how did this conversation get to where we are right now? Or you step outside and you observe the way people are moving and reacting. And that's really what third position is. So I'm going to pause real quickly because this is kind of a new idea. And if people have a question or wanted to add something to that, let's just talk about that. I can actually look, I've got my chat up here on my phone, but are there any questions about the conversational positions? Feel free to go on audio if you want to.
I have a thought.
Yeah, is this Christy?
Yes, and I don't mean this is detrimental at all, but do you think administrators are in first position a lot of the times?
That's a great question. I appreciate the directness of your question. So thank you for asking that question. I have been an administrator. I've never been a building principal. So I would say this. When you are a manager, and there's a difference, I'm going to make a difference between management and leadership. So really good leaders are always in second position and third position. They're always working in that environment. Managers or persons in charge are frequently in first position. And I make a distinction between those. There are some things that building leaders have to do in first position. There's just, I mean, like I say, there's nothing wrong with first position. I think that what distinguishes the leaders that I have loved and what I've tried to emulate in my own leadership is the ability to move into second position and ideally into third position in order to be able to not only hear what people are saying and doing, but then also being able to inform what I need to do. Does that make sense? Yeah, that's a really good question.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I understand why they have to be in first position a lot of times, but I think it would be just so helpful if they would use the back and forth conversation in second position.
Right. And that's, I mean, and that's something, so that's great. This is, I appreciate you asking that question. I think the other thing you have to acknowledge is, particularly now, teachers and the community want schools to have the answers for them. And building principals and district leaders are trying their best to be authoritative because that's what they're asked to do. And they don't have the answers to the question. That tweet that I shared of Michael Nagler gets to that frustration, is they want to be in second, third position, but they're in this situation where they have to be kind of, trying to develop policy and try to come up with the solutions. And so it's going to be a real struggle. So I would just say, as you think about the coming year, try to be empathetic to them. And again, recognizing this, and you're not going to be able to coach your leaders around this, but you can certainly model it. And that's kind of what we're going to kind of talk about. Are there any other questions? I'm checking on chat here, just a second here. Yeah, so Gretchen says, I've learned that addressing defensiveness involves putting yourself either in second or third position. Yes, yeah. And I'm just checking the chat here. Hold on a second. Okay, so the question is really about the defensiveness. I'm going to hold that question because we're going to talk really a little bit more about the process. We're actually going to go through a sequence about what that process would look like. And let's come back to that if that's all right with folks, because I don't want to get ahead of ourselves. I think that as we talk about kind of how we might have these conversations, I think it'll help us move forward. So with that, I'm going to keep us going forward. So I've added, as part of the conversation starter document, we knew that as we released it, everything had changed as well. And so we added kind of a little sidebars to kind of address some questions that people may have that need to be considered as it relates to issues around the pandemic. And you kind of read those questions there yourself. I'm not going to have to read those for you. But as you think about your own growth and fixed mindset, we're living in a pre-pandemic and a post-pandemic kind of pivot right now. And so I think having some reflection about, from your own perspective, are you more fixed or are you more growth right now, 3 months on through this pandemic? In what ways could others' fixed and growth mindset perspective have changed? And so just be sensitive to that, because this may change the calculation in terms of what you can do and what they can do. All right, so step 2 is, where is my future ready? This is the fun part here. Hopefully this is going to work. So we're going to actually have you take the Future Ready Librarian self-reflection activity. And if you're following along on the PDF, this is step 2, so that's why I've pulled this up here. So for this activity, we're going to have you take the self-assessment, and then on your own, also review and reflect on the results. And the survey should take no more than about 5 to 7 minutes. It's not a long survey. It is specifically tied to the framework and asks some specific questions about what you're doing. And then at the very end, it's going to give you essentially kind of a scorecard. And it'll give you a chance to kind of identify those areas that are areas of strength, areas of growth, and so on. I'm going to say right now, it's definitely it's theoretically beyond beta, but it's also still beta. So at the very end of this presentation, I'm going to ask for some feedback. And so if you have some suggestions about how to make it better, please give those to us. But it works. I tested it last night, and it'll give you a chance to kind of at least kind of get some reflection in terms of your specific professional skills. So what we're going to do is we're going to have you take the self-assessment. I'm going to give you some time to do that. Then we're going to have you review and reflect on the results. And then what I'd like you to do then is share to Padlet what are some areas of strength and what are some areas of growth. And then we'll pull everybody together and look at the results. And on the next slide, it's going to, oh, I'm sorry. Hold on a second. I'm going to give you a couple of considerations, and then I'll give you the link to get to it. These are 2 questions to consider also as you think about your responses to this. And it's not necessarily going to change your responses, but kind of keep this in the back of your mind. You know, really be thinking about, you know, as you look at the results, you know, in what ways is this more relevant or less relevant than it was before the pandemic? You know, are there specific areas of professional growth that you might want to consider kind of moving in the direction of that you wouldn't have, say, a year ago with the pandemic not in place? All right. So that's what we're going to do right now. I'm going to give you 10 minutes to complete the self-assessment. I think that should be sufficient. And then what I would like you to do then is kind of just take some first impressions. You don't need to share all your results. This is just for you to be looking at. But I would like you to identify some areas of strength and areas of growth onto a Padlet. And we're going to be using that Padlet for actually 2 more activities. So we're going to kind of build a collective Padlet together. So with that, I'm going to pause. I'm going to check my.
All right, we have some questions, Mark,
Yeah,
on
yeah.
the getting to the survey. And so where?
It should be highlighted at the very top in yellow. It should be the self-reflection survey. And I'm going to stop my sharing just to make sure that that it's there. I think it's set. Hold tight. Okay, so at the very, on the Restarting Conversations organizer.
Oh, there's the Future Ready Librarians Reflection Tool.
Yeah,
Yes.
self-reflection tool. So it's the second yellow link.
Sorry. Yep. Okay, I'll drop that in the chat. Sorry.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah. Some days are harder than others, and today feels challenging.
And actually, what I should have done is, in retrospect, and I will make this for the next version, is I'll put that self-reflection tool in the step 2 area. So we will fix that. But anyway, hopefully people can get to that. And so I'm going to set the timer for about 10 minutes.
Okay, and I've got people saying that it did not bring up the reflection tool. So let's see.
Okay, well, let's just check and see.
Oh, I'm in. Maybe. No.
Yep.
I'm in.
No, for me it just brings up a blank. There's nothing to reflect on here, Mark.
Okay, so let me make sure I've got the right link here. I'm going to put it into the chat. And if this doesn't work, I've got a plan B.
I am in it. I am in the survey, Julie.
Oh, good.
Yeah, I just.
So if it does work.
Yep, it should.
Oh,
work.
am I?
I put it in the chat.
I'm taking it as well right now.
Great. Okay.
Do you have to sign in or anything like that?
It's asking for a name. No, it just asks for just name, email, and whatever, and then you just take the and then just continue down on the survey.
Because I'm still not seeing, I click on the link and it just gives me a heading that says the self-reflection tool, but I'm not actually able to like click on anything or do anything.
Okay, you should see name and then whatever, and then if you scroll down a little bit, it should have literacy, curriculum, instruction, and assessment.
Nope. Does it
No.
matter
Oh,
what
now I,
we're using?
Yeah, I just get the heading too. And I'm with Jen, who's tried it. I haven't tried it in Firefox, but I've tried it in Chrome and Explorer.
Try hitting a refresh
Okay.
on that same page. And I appreciate you guys being crash test dummies for this. So
do I need to subscribe to the mailing list?
No.
It is, again, the link that's on that I just shared. I just had
Well, so it looks like a few of us are getting
Okay,
in, and
so
few of us.
it may have
aren't.
broken. So I think what maybe has happened is that it is either overwhelming the survey engine or, so let's not panic yet. Some people said that they are in. Let's have some people complete that survey. And then as soon as and then let's just wait another 4 minutes or 5 minutes and have people try again. Let's just assume that I can't believe that we're overwhelming that the survey engine, but maybe it is. I don't know. Let's see if we can get some more people in 2 or 3 minutes. Have you try again. And needless to say, I will report this to the team back in DC. But I got into it. I don't think I'm special. Yeah, Suzanne says she's in.
No, we have a handful of people that are in, and a handful of people that aren't.
Yeah, so let's just rotate people through. And again, we're not pulling people back to a group. So we've got about 15 minutes or so to take the survey, do some reflection on it, and then share it to the Padlet. And I'll put the Padlet link in here as well, so that when people do complete the survey, they can start adding to that. And so we'll just be, there's the Padlet.
So I tried it in an incognito window, Mark, and it doesn't work in an incognito window.
This is bizarre.
This is the whole reason I came to work today.
Well, and again, I appreciate the fact that we have, this is kind of our test of the, mine is coming through. I've had issues with their web page before where I've gone into settings and cleared the cache.
Mine randomly started working now, so I'm not
Okay.
sure if some people did start going out or.
Okay, good. Finally got in. Good. Okay.
Yeah, I just kept clicking it and it finally worked.
Okay, great. So I appreciate your patience. Great. Great.
Nope.
Once we get our scores, are we able to download them in any way so we have the results, or?
So at this point, I think the answer is no. I think they're working on that at this point. I would say maybe do a screenshot or save that page. Again, this is kind of beta, so I appreciate you being patient with current state. What I would do is kind of maybe do a snapshot of your results at this point, and then kind of use that as a starting place. Yes, eventually there's going to be a report, but in this version, they don't currently have that in place. And I'm seeing a few other people sort of finishing with the survey. That's good news. Clearing my cache did seem to work. Okay, so good. That might help for those of you that know how to do that.
Just
And
don't
again,
like to do that.
if we don't all get through it today, it's not going to cripple us for. I mean, we'll be fine. You'll be able to do it at a later point, and it's okay. We'll be fine. And for those of you that have successfully gotten through and gotten some results, feel free to post it then to the Padlet. Great, I see someone already has posted their strengths and areas for growth.
I'm in.
Great,
I also cleared my cache.
sorry.
That's okay. I'm fine.
Great, okay, so some people cache worked and some people didn't clear the cache. I'm seeing some other people are posting onto Padlet as well, community partnerships and community collaborative leadership. Some good partnerships in place. So some people, Gretchen, and I realize this is a private conversation, but I don't think it's that private, was talking about that she's in a Catholic school and that it's not allowing to move on. I think you only have to select the state is required, but you don't have to, actually, I don't think that's required. So if you just specify state, that's fine. And I don't think you even have to do that. That shouldn't be required. But if it is, let me know. So I'm getting a message from Gretchen saying that none of them are functional. Okay. Gretchen, I'm sorry that you are struggling with it. I will definitely get that feedback back. Thank you so for sharing it. You are the first people to run it through its paces, and so obviously it needs to do some more running before we share it out. Thank you.
As I'm taking the assessment, I'm in curriculum instruction and assessment, and it kind of threw me a little bit because the rating for the first box starts with never, rarely, occasionally, up to frequently and very frequently, and then the order of that switches to very frequently.
That's a great question. So I asked that same question of Avril, who is the superstar that built these. That's actually intentional. In surveys, they actually flip those so that you pay attention and that you don't simply click down. That's what she explained it to me. So you may disagree with that, but that's the theory behind flipping the order of the descriptors.
Okay.
And Karen is finally in, and she's even got a smiley face. Great. Great. I see some people saying they finished. Fantastic. So when you do finish, then just go ahead and post a few things on the Padlet. I see some people are doing that. Okay. And so some people have moved on to putting some things in the current needs of others, future needs of others, and what's in your collaboration circle. At this point, we haven't gotten to that point yet, so you're a little ahead of the game. So you can go ahead and leave that information there. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But we don't need to fill those out at this point. So all I'm asking for is on the far left side, the strengths and areas for growth. That's all at this point that you need to do. But if you've gone ahead, no worries. It's all good.
Mark, this is Michelle. I have a question. When I took the survey, I answered the questions in reality, but some of them I couldn't. I wanted to answer them a different way because I personally want to do different things, but I don't have control over that.
Yeah, that's a great question. So this is really intended as a self-assessment of current state. So it really, you should try, I appreciate you asking the question. It really should be current state reality. And so if you answered it that way, that's great. This is really designed as a tool for you, not for an evaluator or whatever. And ideally, it's something that you could use at the beginning of the school year or as you start the school year, and then you could do it at the end of the year to see if there was some progress or some change associated with your work. The fact that you're thinking aspirationally about what you could do or the future state, desired state, that's great because that actually will work as you go through the conversation starter. It gives you an opportunity to kind of think about where you might want to go. But I think from a tool is just be honest about where you are at the current state. That's okay. So but you can use it however you want to. Go ahead.
Specifically for my situation, I'm in Cheyenne, Wyoming, and all elementary librarian positions are para positions, right, even if we're certified. So we're very limited as a para in what we're allowed to do, what we're encouraged to do. So just a frame of reference, that's what's happening in my district.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily really the survey is really not yes. And California is in a similar situation. Yes, Washington is increasingly becoming that way. So I'm aware that that's something that's happening elsewhere. And again, this really is intended not as a report card, but as a tool for kind of just holding up some reflection to what you're doing in the current state and where you'd like to go next. So. And let's give our people about another minute or so because I'm looking at the time and I want to make sure that we get through the other steps. And if we don't get through today, you will have this link and you can do it on your own, hopefully when it's behaving a little bit more nicely. And since I have contact with Joan and Julie, if I need to get an updated link or I can give you an update when we get when things get better. So just in case people never get in, we can try to fix it. Great. I appreciate there's the comment about the wording of the questions and such. So when you get a message that there's a problem with your submission, I think that they will say that there's something that wasn't filled out. You have to fill out all of the answers down below. I did that too. So try just checking to see if you forgot to answer one of the questions. Great. Okay. And recognizing that I'm going to have some people still working on this, I'm going to go ahead and grab my screen and we're going to go ahead and keep moving through here. Okay, hopefully people are seeing my orange slide.
Yes, we're
All
back.
right, great. All right, so we've really kind of now completed the personal reflections. So we've thought about your mindset, you've thought about your professional practice. Now we kind of know ourselves, and so the next thing we have in the process is really trying to identify what are those things that we need to understand about our school and district context in a more deep way in order to be prepared for that conversation. So I'm going to talk briefly about kind of what school and district strategic plans look like. Again, for many librarians, those aren't something that you pay attention to very often, but as part of the process, we want you to kind of do some research, some due diligence so you can understand that better. And really talk about, trying to think about how do you expand your understanding beyond your library to what's going on in the school, what's going on at the district level. And we'll talk a little bit about the silos. And this is kind of in relation to some of the other comments that were made earlier about first, second, and third position. So I've done numerous workshops and presentations around this question of what keeps leaders up at night. Whether you're a district leader or a school leader, there's different things that are kind of challenges that need to be addressed. You can flip this around and make it a little bit more positive and say, instead of nightmares, what do administrators dream about? What do district leaders dream about? I'm going to talk a little bit about being on the dark side. I did it for 7 years, and it is kind of dark at times, but at the same time, I've learned some amazing lessons about leadership that I think have been really valuable, and some of the things are kind of built into this conversation starter document. And really, the biggest challenge is how do you align district and building and state and local needs in a way where there's a win for everyone, and that is really a challenge. I'm going to be one of the things I'm going to disabuse you of the notion is that principals and district leaders do not sit at the same table. They do not eat the same food, they do not go to the same bathrooms, and they don't work from the same script. The only exception to that is when you're in a really, really, really small school district, high-functioning school district, you may have that opportunity. But in my district, my principals were apples, and the district leaders were pineapples. And there was a significant disconnect between what the principals believed and thought was important and what district leaders believed was important. And I was in a relatively high functioning district. So you need to realize is that not everybody wears the same shoes, uses the same bathroom, or believes in the same things. And there's a real big significant difference between school and district. So I made this really sophisticated diagram here. And I'm going to talk you through it just very quickly, but you need to understand the silos. And I'm going to talk about then how libraries fit into this. So at the national level, you obviously have the U.S. Department of Education. You have national nonprofits like Digital Promise, ISTE, AASL, that are kind of trying to influence policy and create ideas that move down the continuum. At the state level, generally speaking, you're going to have a superintendent of public instruction or someone who has a similar role, and then a Department of Education. You may also have smaller educational service districts. These are the people that take national policy or state legislation and implement it into school policy. And then it goes down to the district silo. And at the district silo, you have a school board, and those are the people that really run the district. Even if you have a superintendent, ultimately the school board are the people who hire and fire the superintendent. They are ultimately responsible to the state and to the community for what happens in the schools. Below them is a superintendent, and then usually a cabinet, which is the highest ranking people within a district. And then those people all work at the district office. That's the domain that I did most of my work over the last 8 years. At the school level, you have principals and associate principals as well as deans, and those are the school leaders. Very frequently, if you could draw on the screen, there's a significant line between district and school, and that gap really should be wider. And it's not necessarily a bad thing, but as you're thinking about looking for resources, you need to realize that districts will have strategic plans that are kind of these high-minded, long-term goals that focus on digital learning, on literacy, kind of where the district wants to go in the next 5 years. Our district has a really good strategic plan. I put an example of it on there. We also have an example on the organizer of Highline School District, which is a really high functioning district in the Seattle area. So those are kind of the broad scale things. But each of the individual schools is going to have what's called a school improvement plan or something similar to that, which really gets down to, more often than not, kind of the granular student outcomes that they're trying to change. So improve math scores, improve reading scores, reduce disproportionality of discipline, things like that. And so those two theoretically should fit together, but they don't always fit together. And then last but not least, you have the community, which actually exerts a really powerful influence. I have them kind of the lowest on the hierarchy, but in many ways, they actually drive a lot of the thinking and the decision-making that moves up. So where do librarians fit in this? Okay, so for most people, for most administrators, for most educators, people see libraries as part of the school silo. Okay, it's a piece of many things that fit into the school silo. The challenge is, and this is how I want you to think about the opportunities that you're creating with these conversations with school and district leaders, is what we want to do is we want to see the library as connected to all those things. And I know that aspirationally, we all believe these things. And I noticed in the comments that people made about kind of their strengths, they were talking about partnerships. Absolutely, that's really critical. But you need to realize that many people see libraries as just one piece of one silo. And what your challenge is to help your school or district leader see the library as something that fits across the silos and meets the needs and challenges of other groups. Okay, and that's kind of what we're aiming for. But you need to understand that these silos are very powerful. They're the ways that people see organizational challenges and look at problems. And so if you kind of understand this schema, this is going to help you in your conversation with your building principal. I'm going to pause real quickly here to see if people have questions or comments about that. Checking the chat here. If you have comments, feel free to throw them in the chat. I'm looking at the chat. Or if people have a question, you can say it out loud too.
Mark, this is a really interesting, and this is really interesting to think about perspectives, and I think how we think about ourselves versus the reality of it.
And I'm just trying to give it to you straight. I mean, this is in my conversations at the national, state, district level. This really is the challenge is getting from here to here, in a nutshell.
Are you going to share these slides with us when you're done?
I can. I'll pull together some kind of the highlights for sure.
You just have some really nice visuals that I think a number of us are some of us are all alone in our districts, but others of us are in leadership roles within the district. And I think this could be really, really powerful to share with people.
Great. Well, thank you. I tried to make it as simple as possible because it sometimes can be kind of overwhelming. So here's some questions. Again, pandemic questions that need to be considered is, I think the real question is as you're looking at the strategic plans, the reality is that those strategic plans were written and the school improvement plans were written before the pandemic. And now everything has changed. Everything has changed. And so it is important to understand what those goals were and realize that you have district leaders and school leaders that still want to get to those targets. And so the opportunity is for you as a leader to come in and say, hey, I know that our goal was to improve math scores, but I have a hunch that that's going to be a real challenge given the next coming year. I have a strategy, or I would like to work with other teachers to help meet that goal. If you can show your knowledge of understanding what their goals, that keeps them up at night, then that gives you power in the conversation to be able to meet those needs. So really, that's what's really kind of exciting about this pandemic, is that it gives an opportunity for some new inroads for conversations to take place. All right, next step is, what are the missing pieces? So once you have done the research in terms of your strategic plans, looking at the school improvement plans, understanding if there are new capital improvements, maybe there's a digital initiative, something like that, then really it's about getting a conversation with your building or district leader to really kind of fill in the pieces. So you've done some due diligence on your end. You've been able to think about some of your skills and your resources that you can bring to the table. You've done some research in terms of what they're trying to do. So we're now going to try to figure out, what more do you need to understand to be able to come up with a solution. So I'm going to talk a little bit about interpersonal. So I'm going to come back to this idea of how do you build capacity to be able to have a good conversation. We'll talk a little bit about empathy and rapport, planning for the conversation, and then we're going to do a little quick, I think we'll have enough time to do one more breakout conversation about some of the immediate needs and the future needs for student success. And then we're going to post those onto Padlet. So I took a class recently on human-centered design, and it really is for some of you maybe are familiar with this idea, it's worth doing some research. I put a link on the organizer for the IDEO toolkit on human-centered design, but it's really a good strategy or way of thinking about how to think about coming up with solutions to problems. I'm going to repeat again, this is really critical in the conversations that you have with district leaders, to listen, to hear, and reflect, is to keep that process going, because you need to understand what it feels like to be in their shoes. It's a different perspective. It's a different set of challenges. And if you can find ways to understand that in a more deep way, then you're going to be much more better positioned to be able to respond to those needs. The other thing too that's really critical, and I noticed in the chat there were some comments about this, is it's really critical to perceive rather than presume motivations and beliefs on the part of administrators. The whole idea of the silos, again, was important, because I want you to understand is that people have challenges, and librarians have challenges in their professional practice. Administrators also have those challenges. There's bad leadership, bad information, all those kind of challenges are there. And so it's really important to be open to the possibility that your principal is struggling with some really big challenges. And if you can understand those, you can possibly help to address those in different ways. The other thing too that is something I would put on my growth mindset spectrum is jumping to solutions. I love ideas. I'm quick to think, and I'm always coming up with ideas like, maybe we can do this. And that can be a problem when you're having a conversation with a district leader. It really, you don't want to come with 5 solutions and say, choose which solution you want me to do. You need to have a conversation with your leaders so that they can be part of the thinking and the processing for that. They may have a different idea than what you have. And so don't immediately try to come up with some solutions. And then again, try to see your challenges in a growth mindset mode. Try to think of them in the way that human-centered design looks at the problems and uses the problems as a means to think innovatively about the solution making. The other thing too is, again, in planning for the conversation with anyone, is you got to presume good intentions. And you may have baggage or history with your district leader or building leader. But you got to go into that conversation assuming that they want the same things you want, and that is to make sure that your students get educated in an equitable way. I would also predicate abnormality. Next year is going to be crazy, and just assume that the way people think and the way they process and the solutions that they're looking for are predicated on this the state of abnormality. And so just factor that in as you're thinking about those conversations. Use your perceptual positions, that idea of the first person, second position, third position, as a tool for being proactive in that conversation that you're having. Try to engage rather than advocate. This conversation can't be about you trying to sell a product. It needs to be a conversation that you have with a district leader or a building leader to come up collectively with a solution that might work. And then do your best to pretend that you're a principal. I actually put a couple of links for articles. I wrote an article several years ago for School Library Journal about the ways in which librarians are a lot like principals. And so try to be empathetic about the position that they're in, so that will help you be successful in the conversation you have with them. And here's a concrete example of that. So as I mentioned, the Future Ready Librarians developed the kind of the new design for the framework. And what happened after, because the Future Ready Librarians were so successful, we created a strand for principals, for coaches, for IT leaders, and district leaders. And they all use the exact same design as we did as librarians. So proud of us, we were the first ones to do it. But as you notice, there's some similarities between the two of them. And what we actually, I've pulled actually language from the different areas of the framework. And so I want you to kind of, I think everyone can read what's on the screen here. Try to identify which of these come from the principal side and which of them come from the librarian side. I'm going to give you a minute to kind of scan that really quickly and try to decide which one is principal and which one is librarian. And look at the similarities in terms of the language between the two of them. So I'll give you about a minute for that. Okay, so I'm going to give you a short minute because we're just about out of time. So the one on the left was librarian, and the one on the right was principal. And notice that the language is very, very similar. There's a lot of connections between the two of them. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cut through this really fast because I'm going to trying to catch up here on time. So this is about robust infrastructure. And so the language on the left is principal, the language on the right is librarian. But you notice that the roles could be interchangeable here, is that what the librarians are asking for and what the principals are asking for, there's a lot of overlap there. So the point I'm trying to make here with the comparison of the two frameworks is that at the end of the day, a lot of the interests and the needs that both librarians and principals have are similar. And so really what your challenge is how do you find yourself talking about the same thing so that you can kind of focus on the same challenges. Again, one of the things that needs to be considered with the pandemic is the fact that the urgency and prioritization of the needs may have changed. So some of the things that were part of those plans a year ago have likely maybe moved aside or have been changed in terms of their priority. And so just really kind of be sensitive to the fact that there may be some changes in place that have taken place that are going to affect not only what gets prioritized, but also where you want to spend the time. I'm going to actually, because we don't have 15 minutes, I'm going to go ahead and pass through this. You have access to the Padlet. I would appreciate if you could share some of the areas that you think are some of most immediate needs that you see in your schools right now in terms of supporting students and teachers. And then also about what is next. And when I think about next, I'm thinking about next year. What are some of those things that are going to be necessary to support? Taking a look at what we've kind of built on that Padlet is that you have some strengths and your challenges. You've identified some things that are priorities, and try to identify what those needs might be. All right, so step 5 is where the dots connect. And really, this is about just narrowing your focus. There's a lot of things. So once you've done the research associated with what your district and your school is looking for, you've identified those assets that you can bring to the table. Now what you need to do is do some curation and narrowing. So here's just some examples of some things that might have come out. I've actually pulled some specific language from a strategic plan and a school improvement plan. So these are things that you would bring forward to share and say, hey, these are the things that I understand that my school district is focused on. On the right-hand side, you have some things that the librarian brings forward, examples of strengths. And then what you really trying to do is trying to narrow those down, put those in the same circle, and identify where there's some overlap. So as an example, for the current, I use this as an example of kind of the present state, is that we have a lot of schools and a lot of teachers that are forced to be online and trying to deal with remote learning. So school and district challenge is that we want to have district digital learning in place, and we have some new need to support teachers for remote learning. Oh, okay, so the librarian can bring forward the strength that they already have strong rapport with teachers and parents, and that they have the ability to use those digital tools. So you put those in the circle, and again, this may seem a little bit simple, but it helps to have the ability to kind of see where there's those synergies between the two, because those connections, the connections may not be seen by your district leader or your building leader. And so if you can kind of put those in the same circle and kind of see where those supports are in place, that's important. You can also then have other strengths. So if you did the survey and you have other tools or other resources or other strengths you have in place, go ahead and put those on the sheet. But they don't necessarily have to be in the circle. And it could be that maybe there is some connection between the two, but what you want to do is try to narrow those specific needs within that one circle. Couple of things about this process. This process was developed to be something that you would do physically with a person at a table, and obviously we can't do that now. So a couple of things to think about as you're thinking about the conversation. Half-baked is just fine. Don't feel like you have to come with a finished solution. What you really want to do is identify what are those things that you can bring to the table, what are those needs that your school and district needs that they have, and then work to try to put those pieces together. Bring just enough ideas so that you can be focused. Don't bring pages and pages of resources. Try to narrow things down so that it's manageable. Connections are perceived differently. You may see connections that your building or district leader may not see. So be sensitive to that possibility, and really always focus on student and teacher needs versus the needs of your library. Obviously, your library supports students and teachers, but try to kind of keep the language focused on the stakeholders that you have in your schools. So step 6 is what can we do together? I'm going really quickly through this. I apologize, but I want to make sure that we complete this, and then I will get out of your way so you can finish the rest of your day. So what can we do together really is about your opportunity to have a sit-down conversation or a virtual conversation with your district or school leader. And so I want to talk a little bit just briefly about what the fall is going to look like, and how you could narrow the conversation. So I'm just going to let you look at that. I think that the fall is going to be a unique challenge for everyone. I think that topics that you can bring to the table and areas of focus that you can have with your building and school leaders is equity. I think addressing the challenges of equity has not gone away. That's going to be a priority for everyone, and that is an opportunity for you to talk differently about that with your building or district leader. The grace period has ended. I'm being a little facetious here, is that we've kind of given everybody grace in this last 3 or 4 months. But come fall, there's going to be increased challenges for accountability and ensuring participation of students and teachers. And so that's going to be a real issue that needs to be addressed. The fact that we don't have students in class and that we can't suspend them or reprimand them for not paying attention means that we don't have sticks anymore. And so the need for finding authentic ways for students to be engaged in the work is going to be a real opportunity, I think, going forward. I think that whatever we do next year is going to be in fits and starts. There's going to be some solutions and some failures, and it's going to change probably on a month-to-month basis. So just realize that we're in a fluid situation. I think the idea of one size fits all never really did work, and yet we persisted with that. There's no way that one size is going to fit all going forward, and so coming up with a variety of solutions that can be applied in different situations is going to be really critical. And I think that uncertainty is the only thing that we can be certain of going forward. So here's a concrete example of what this could look like. So if you think about, again, a prototype example here, is that let's say you have teachers at home that are struggling with learning online. You might bring forward the idea of the librarian being a remote learning mentor. And so basically, how could the librarian support classroom teachers in their implementation of remote learning? Another example could be, let's say you're really big on computational thinking and maker spaces. You may not be able to do a makerspace in the next year, but perhaps you could pivot and develop something so that you could engage students in computational thinking, possibly with their parents in some kind of an activity. So this is just an example of something you would bring forward, and no more than this. This is you take this and share this with your building or district leader and say, hey, this is an idea that I have. It's kind of a half-baked idea. I wonder what you think about this. And then do some brainstorming to think about, if you like one of those ideas, then basically just create a simple organizer where you identify who, what, where, and when for one specific idea. Don't try to do 3 things at the same time, but let's say you focus on this challenge of remote learning mentor. Try to identify the who's, the what's, the where's, and the when's. And basically, if we were doing this in person, we would put sticky notes on the sheet. We can't do that, so you'll need to create a shared document that you would work with your district leader. And basically, you just try to identify how to start the work moving forward. All right. One of the challenges, obviously, if you can't meet in person, I know in some places you're going to be able to do that. This activity is really best designed to be something where you can sit at a table and work with sticky notes and such. If you can't do that, figure out how you can effectively collaborate and have that conversation with someone that can't be in the room at the same time. Okay, so step 7, the last step, is really as you've completed the process. So you've had 2 conversations with your district leaders or your building leaders, and you've completed the work. You've started the process. You've had the conversation. You've got a program going forward. The last step really is to continue that process of reflection. Think about the ways in which what have you learned about yourself? What have you learned about your district or building leader? And really make sure that you kind of lock in on those things and understand them. It's really critical to always be thinking about your own professional growth and your perspectives. And also, now that you're having that conversation with a district or building leader, it's really important to also be thoughtful about where they stand. How are they different from you? What have you learned about them? What are some conversations that need to continue so that you can better kind of build those relationships? And that's really a critical piece. So I apologize because I realized that I've gone about 8 minutes over and I rushed through that last part and we've stopped a couple of processes. So I want to check in with Julie and Joan to see if there are some questions or kind of where we stand on time.
So we are a little over. I'm fully engrossed, and so I'm like, keep talking, Mark. But we could be groupies. So, this has been really informative. And you guys want to go ahead and unmute you guys and talk too, because.
And maybe we should just have just a little bit of a conversation. I've turned off my slide sharing. So just kind of some questions or comments about what people have heard and what they're thinking about in terms of as they think about their planning for the future. Got some awesomes and thank yous. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. But what are some questions that came up as part of that? And since I was a district leader for 8 years, maybe you can ask me some questions about, you know, how to deal with people from the dark side.
Mark, I'm Sandy Arsenault from Custer, South Dakota.
Hi, Sandy.
And I think one of my biggest fears or my biggest concerns in our district, and I think many of our rural schools feel the same, that our positions get spread so thin and are asked to do so many different and go in different directions. If there was one thing that you could stress, or I should stress to our administrators as to where we should be focusing, what would that be?
Great question. And I would turn that one around. Is I think you could maybe have in your mind a couple things. So I think so from a librarian perspective, I think there's 3 big challenges. One is access to digital tools and resources. So in what ways can the librarian support that? If that's something if you're doing remote learning, that's going to be a challenge. Literacy is going to continue to be a significant challenge, particularly if there's limited access to books, reading instructions, so on. That's going to be a big one as well. I think information literacy and media literacy, there's so much disinformation associated with the pandemic, and now it's gone to a life and death matter. Those are 3 things that off the top of my head that I think librarians are well positioned to be able to support. But I do think the gist of this conversation starter is that you need to ask the building or district leader, what keeps you up at night? How can I help? You know, and maybe it's just have them prioritized 3 things that they need right now, or that they need as they think about next year. Take that information, don't have an answer right in place, process that and say, hey, I would like to now think about that, reflect on that, and then come back to you in another week and have some possible solutions about how to approach this. The whole idea of this conversation starter is to kind of turn it from us trying to figure out what the solution is, because no one can figure out what the future is turning that around to asking district leaders to say, hey, how can I help? And this is really the process behind that. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but I think that's the way I would approach that question.
It does. Thank you.
I'm just looking at the comments. All right, cool. All right, so I'm going to thank you. Got some thank yous, and I know you want to get on to lunch. So one thing I'm going to ask you as a small favor, I'm going to pull up on the organizer. Actually, I don't need to go back to the slides. On the organizer, at the very end, there is a short survey that I would really appreciate your feedback. So I'm asking for feedback on 3 things. One, the conversation starter document, which I know that you've just started looking at that, and there's 15 pages or 17 pages of it. So I understand that, you know, some of you that you may be just starting to look at that, but any feedback would be useful on that. 2, on the self-assessment tool, recognizing that it crashed on us. Okay, brave before perfect, that's okay. So acknowledging that, but as you looked at that, any feedback that you can provide on that will be used, that will make it better. And then 3, any feedback on this presentation, on this workshop, because again, this is the first time I've ever done this with librarians. I appreciate you guys being brave and the crash test dummies for that. So feedback would really be appreciated. And that'll take you all about 5 minutes, and then you guys can start your lunch. But unless there's any other questions, thank you, Julie, for putting it in the chat box. And all my contact information is on the organizer. So, Julie, I think I was only 13 minutes late. I'm sorry.
You're fine. You're fine. This was so this was, I think, more than, I mean, this is stuff that Joan and I have been struggling with, and so this is really amazing. We're just thrilled. So thank you.
Well, great, and I appreciate everyone keeping along with me. It's hard to do this. This is much more funner to do when you're doing it face to face. So I appreciate you trying to do it in a digital environment. So best of luck to you. Thanks so much, and good luck with your grant. I look forward to staying in touch with Joan and Julie and finding out what cool things you guys do. So thanks so much. I'll say goodbye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
Bye-bye.
All right,
Wow.
crew. Wow, I know. That's why I said wow. Okay. So we are officially in lunch. Joan, I was going to pull up the agenda and kind of see what flexibility we have after lunch. Do we have any flexibility, or where are we at?
Just a moment too. I had the survey up. I was taking a look at that. After lunch, we're going to do our state groups, which I
Okay.
think we'll just go right ahead in time. And then we have our author at 1 o'clock.
Okay.
But at 2 o'clock, we have some flexibility. And I think we can revisit Mark's survey and take a look if there are any questions at that time.
Yes.
Okay, and then we've got some reflection time and during our wrap up. So we will be done at 4 today or before.
Mountain time.
Mountain time, 4 mountain time or before.
Don't give those Central Time people any.
Sorry. Okay.
Charla.
but we're right on. We need to stay right on track for our 12 o'clock Mountain Time state meetings and our 1 o'clock Mountain Time author visit.
Okay, that sounds good.
Right?
Yes. All right.
But thank you, and this has been fantastic because I know so many conversations have included about talking to administrators in the last 2 years. So thank you.